A homeless, injured veteran crawled through a blizzard into what he thought was an abandoned mansion, only to discover it belonged to Johnny Depp, and hidden in the frozen attic was a safe holding $265 million that would change everything he thought he knew about survival, sacrifice, and second chances. Before we dive into this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The wind didn't just howl through the Colorado mountains that night. It screamed. It tore through the pine forests like something alive, something angry, ripping branches from trees and hurling snow in sideways sheets so thick the world disappeared into white chaos. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees below zero, the kind of cold that burns exposed skin in seconds, that turns breath to ice crystals before it even leaves your lungs. Most people were inside, huddled near fireplaces in their mountain cabins, wrapped in thick blankets, sipping hot chocolate, grateful for walls and warmth and the simple mercy of shelter. But Marcus Webb wasn't most people, and tonight he was dying. He stumbled through the drifts, each step a battle against wind that tried to knock him backward, against snow that swallowed his boots to the knee, against a body that had already given more than it had left to give. His right leg dragged behind him, nearly useless, the shrapnel wound from Kandahar 7 years ago screaming with every movement. The VA had promised surgery. They'd promised benefits, disability payments, proper care. But promises didn't keep you warm when the world turned its back. Promises didn't fill your stomach when the shelters were full. Promises didn't matter when you were alone in a blizzard with nowhere to go. Marcus was 41 years old, though if you'd seen him in that moment, fighting through the storm, you might have guessed 60. His face was weathered and raw, his beard matted with ice that pulled at his skin with every gust of wind, his hands, wrapped in fingerless gloves donated from some church basement months ago, had gone numb an hour earlier. He couldn't feel his toes anymore. That scared him more than he wanted to admit. Frostbite didn't announce itself with pain. It crept in quietly, stealing pieces of you while you weren't paying attention. He'd seen it happen to soldiers in Afghanistan, guys who'd lost fingers and toes because they hadn't noticed until it was too late. His eyes, once sharp and clear from years of military training, now carried the fog of exhaustion and something deeper. Defeat. Not the kind that comes from losing a fight, but the kind that seeps in slowly when you realize the fight never ends, when you understand that survival isn't a destination but a daily war you wage alone. He wore 3 coats, layered one over the other, all donated, all threadbare. Beneath them 2 sweaters and a thermal shirt that had stopped being thermal somewhere around the 3rd winter. His jeans were stiff with cold and old stains. His boots, once military issue, now held together with duct tape and determination. Marcus had been living rough for 18 months. Not by choice. Never by choice. After his discharge, he'd tried to hold on. He'd rented a small apartment in Denver, worked odd jobs, mechanical work mostly, things his hands still remembered even when his leg refused to cooperate. But the medical bills piled up faster than he could pay them. The pain medication cost more than food. The physical therapy appointments he couldn't afford meant his leg got worse instead of better. When the eviction notice came, he'd thought it was temporary, just a setback. He'd sleep in his car for a few weeks, get back on his feet, find something better. But his car broke down outside Boulder. He couldn't afford to fix it, couldn't afford the tow, so he walked away from it, everything he owned in a backpack, and joined the invisible army of people who'd slipped through the cracks. No family left to call. His mother had passed when he was deployed the first time. His father, a mean drunk who'd driven Marcus to enlist in the first place, died in a bar fight 3 years ago. No siblings. No wife. There had been someone once, Kelly, and they'd had a daughter together, Emma. But Kelly had remarried after the divorce, moved to California with Emma, built a new life that didn't include a broken veteran who couldn't hold down a job. He sent letters sometimes, when he could afford stamps, when he could find paper, short notes telling Emma he loved her, that he was proud of her, that he'd be there for her someday. She never wrote back. He didn't blame her. What could he offer her? A father who couldn't even keep a roof over his own head? The storm had hit without warning. Marcus had been heading toward a shelter 30 miles south, a place that usually had beds available when the snow started falling. Within an hour, visibility dropped to nothing. The roads emptied, cars vanished, and Marcus realized he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd thought he could make it, thought his training would carry him through. 20 years in the military had taught him how to survive in hostile environments, how to push through pain, how to keep moving when everything in you screamed to stop. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was Colorado in January, and Mother Nature didn't care about your service record. His GPS had died 2 hours ago, the battery finally giving out. He'd been following the road, or what he thought was the road, but the snow had covered everything. No tire tracks, no signs, just endless white stretching in every direction. His flashlight was dying too, the beam growing weaker with each passing minute. Soon he'd be in complete darkness. The thought sent a spike of fear through him, sharp and cold. Darkness in a blizzard meant death. You couldn't see obstacles, couldn't tell if you were walking in circles, couldn't find shelter. He'd known soldiers who'd frozen to death in the mountains of Afghanistan, caught out in unexpected snowstorms during night patrols. He remembered the way they looked when they found them the next day, curled up like children, faces peaceful, as if they'd just fallen asleep. He wouldn't go like that. He couldn't. Not after everything he'd survived. Not after Kandahar, after the explosion that had torn through his unit, killing 3 of his brothers and leaving Marcus with a leg full of shrapnel and ears that rang constantly. Not after rebuilding himself in the hospital, relearning how to walk, how to function, how to exist in a world that moved too fast and cared too little. He'd survived the war. He'd survived this. He had to. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a hallucination, his brain trying to give him hope as his body shut down. But he blinked hard, wiped the ice from his eyelashes, and looked again. Through the swirling snow, maybe 100 yards ahead, a shape emerged from the darkness. Large, solid, a building. His heart stuttered in his chest, hope flaring so bright it hurt. He pushed forward, ignoring the way his leg buckled, ignoring the pain that shot up his spine with every step. Just get there, just make it to the building. Everything else could wait. As he got closer, the shape resolved into something impossible. A mansion. Not a cabin, not a small mountain home, but a massive stone structure that rose from the forest like something out of a fairy tale. 3 stories tall, with steep, gabled roofs already buried under snow. Tall windows, dark and lifeless. Stone walls that looked ancient, weathered, permanent. A wide driveway curved up to the front entrance, though Marcus couldn't see where it led because the snow had swallowed everything. The property was surrounded by a wrought iron fence, ornate and expensive-looking, but the gate hung open, crooked on its hinges, as if it hadn't been closed in years. Marcus stopped at the gate, his breath coming in ragged gasps that turned to ice clouds in the air. Something felt wrong about this place. Not dangerous exactly, but off. The mansion was too big, too elaborate for these isolated mountains. And it was dark, completely dark. No lights in any window, no smoke from the multiple chimneys, no signs of life at all. It looked abandoned, forgotten, like something that had been left to rot slowly under the weight of time and snow. But Marcus didn't care if it was abandoned or cursed or haunted by the ghosts of every bad decision its owners had ever made. It had walls, it had a roof, it might have heat or at least shelter from the wind. That was more than he had out here. He pushed through the gate and started up the driveway. The snow was deeper here, undisturbed by tire tracks or footprints. No one had been here in weeks, maybe months. The driveway curved through what must have been beautiful landscaping once. He passed snow-covered sculptures, expensive-looking stone pieces that jutted from the drifts like frozen sentinels. Dead hedges lined the path, skeletal and bent under the weight of ice. Everything spoke of wealth, of careful planning, of a life lived far above the concerns of ordinary people, and yet here it sat, empty and silent, slowly being buried by winter. Marcus reached the front entrance, a massive double door made of dark wood with iron fixtures that looked hand-forged. He tried the handle, knowing it would be locked but needing to try anyway. It didn't budge. Of course not. Nothing in Marcus's life came easy. He stood there for a moment, swaying slightly, his vision starting to blur at the edges. He was running out of time. His body was shutting down, pulling blood away from his extremities to protect his core. Soon he'd lose the ability to think clearly, to move purposefully, and then he'd just sit down in the snow and never get up. He couldn't let that happen. Marcus turned and began working his way around the side of the mansion, one hand trailing along the stone wall for balance. The stone was so cold it burned through his gloves, but it kept him upright. He passed tall windows with shutters pulled tight, their paint peeling in long strips. He passed what looked like a covered pool area, the tarp sagging under the weight of snow and ice. He passed a garage with bay doors rusted shut, a basketball hoop with a net that had rotted away, a patio with furniture that looked like it had been expensive once but now sat crumbling under the elements. At the back of the house, near what he guessed was the kitchen, Marcus found a service entrance. Just a simple door, smaller than the grand entrance out front, probably meant for deliveries or staff. He tried the handle. It turned. The lock was broken or rusted through. He couldn't tell which and didn't care. The door groaned open on hinges that screamed in protest, the sound swallowed immediately by the howling wind. Marcus stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind him. The silence that followed was so complete it made his ears ring. He stood in the darkness, breathing hard, his body shaking uncontrollably as it tried to process the change in temperature. It wasn't warm inside, not by any stretch, but it wasn't 15 below zero either. The air was stale, thick, heavy with the smell of dust and old stone and something else he couldn't quite identify. Abandonment. That's what it smelled like. The particular scent of a place where no one had drawn breath or opened a window or disturbed the air in a very long time. Marcus pulled out his flashlight and clicked it on. The beam was weak now, barely penetrating the shadows, but it was enough. He stood in a mudroom or service area. Coat hooks lined one wall, all empty. A bench sat beneath them, its cushion flat and colorless. Beyond that, a doorway led deeper into the house. He moved forward slowly, his boots tracking snow and ice across what had once been clean floors. The doorway opened into a kitchen, and Marcus stopped, his flashlight sweeping across a scene that made no sense. The kitchen was enormous, the kind you'd see in magazines about luxury homes. A massive island dominated the center, its granite countertop covered in a thick layer of dust. Copper pots hung from a rack above the island, tarnished green with age. Stainless steel appliances lined the walls, a commercial-grade stove, a refrigerator big enough to hold a week's worth of food for a family of 10, a wine cooler with glass doors that showed rows of empty slots. Everything was in place. Everything was orderly. It was as if someone had been cooking dinner, had stepped away for just a moment and never came back. Marcus opened one of the cabinets. Plates neatly stacked, expensive-looking china with gold trim. Another cabinet held glasses, crystal by the look of them, each one carefully arranged. The drawers were full of silverware, cooking utensils, gadgets he didn't recognize. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been vandalized. The house hadn't been ransacked or stripped by thieves. It had simply been abandoned, left exactly as it was, as if the people who lived here had vanished into thin air. On the wall near the refrigerator hung a calendar, the paper yellowed and curling at the edges. Marcus stepped closer, his flashlight illuminating the page. December 2010. 15 years ago. Whatever had happened here, whatever had caused the owners to leave, it had happened more than a decade ago. And in all that time, no one had come back. No one had claimed the property, sold it, demolished it. It had just sat here, frozen in time, waiting. Marcus moved through the kitchen into a formal dining room. A table long enough to seat 20 people stretched down the center of the room, each chair draped in a white sheet that had turned gray with dust. Above the table hung a chandelier, massive and elaborate, its crystals thick with grime but still catching tiny fragments of his flashlight beam and throwing them across the walls like stars. Paintings lined the room, large oil pieces in heavy frames, landscapes mostly, mountains and forests and rivers, all rendered in rich colors that had faded only slightly. These weren't prints bought at a furniture store. These were original works, expensive, probably worth more than Marcus had earned in his entire military career. He kept moving, room by room, his flashlight carving paths through the darkness. A sitting room with leather furniture covered in sheets. A library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, every shelf packed with leather-bound volumes. A study with a massive desk and filing cabinets and a globe that looked antique. A bathroom with marble floors and a tub big enough to swim in. A hallway lined with closed doors, each one leading to more rooms Marcus didn't have the energy to explore yet. Every space was the same, untouched, preserved, abandoned. It was in the living room that Marcus finally stopped and let himself feel the full weight of what he'd stumbled into. The living room was huge, with vaulted ceilings and exposed beams and a stone fireplace so large you could walk into it. The furniture here was covered too, but Marcus could see the shapes beneath the sheets, expensive couches, designer chairs, a coffee table that looked like it was made from a single piece of wood, and on the walls, things that made his breath catch. Movie posters, not framed like art, but casual, leaning against the walls as if someone had been deciding where to hang them. Pirates of the Caribbean, Edward Scissorhands, Sweeney Todd, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, all of them originals by the look of it, signed by cast and crew. Marcus's heart began to pound. He moved closer to the fireplace, his flashlight sweeping across the mantel, and there, in the center, he saw it. A framed photograph. Not a poster, not a piece of memorabilia, but a personal photo in a simple silver frame. The glass was dusty, but Marcus could still see the image clearly. A man and a woman, both young, both beautiful, both laughing. They stood in front of this very house, but in the photo the house was alive. Lights glowed in the windows, the landscaping was pristine, and the man in the photo, his arm around the woman's shoulders, his smile wide and genuine, was unmistakably, impossibly Johnny Depp. Marcus staggered backward, his injured leg giving out. He caught himself on the back of a sheet-covered couch, his mind reeling. Johnny Depp, one of the most famous actors in the world. This was his house, or had been. But why would someone like Johnny Depp abandon a place like this? Why leave everything behind, the furniture, the art, the personal photos, as if he'd walked out one day and simply never returned? Marcus looked around the room with new eyes. In the corner sat a guitar, its case open, the instrument itself covered in dust but clearly expensive. Near the window stood a music stand with sheet music still clipped to it, the notes faded but readable. On a side table, leather-bound scripts were stacked neatly, their spines cracked from use, some with handwritten notes visible on the exposed pages. This wasn't just a house Johnny Depp had owned. This was a place he'd lived. A sanctuary. A hideaway. And for reasons Marcus couldn't begin to understand, he'd walked away from it and never looked back. The mystery of it pressed down on Marcus like a physical weight. But beneath the mystery was something more immediate, more practical. He was standing in a mansion that belonged to one of the most recognizable people on the planet, a mansion that had been abandoned for 15 years, and no one knew he was here. Marcus sank onto the couch, not caring about the dust that rose around him, not caring about anything except the fact that his body had finally stopped shaking. He was inside. He was out of the wind. He wasn't going to freeze to death tonight. But as he sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of someone else's life, Marcus understood that he'd stumbled into something much bigger than shelter. He'd stumbled into a secret, and secrets, especially ones this big, always came with a price. Marcus woke to pale gray light filtering through the gaps in the shuttered windows. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. His body ached in places he'd forgotten could hurt, and his right leg throbbed with a deep, burning pain that meant he'd pushed it too hard the night before. Then memory flooded back. The storm, the mansion, Johnny Depp's face in that photograph. He sat up slowly, wincing as his spine protested. He'd fallen asleep on the couch in the living room, still wearing all three of his coats, still clutching his dying flashlight. The mansion was silent around him, the kind of silence that felt heavy, watchful, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Outside, the storm had passed. Through a crack in the shutters, Marcus could see blue sky and brilliant white snow covering everything like a clean slate. The world looked peaceful, untouched, as if the violence of the night before had never happened. But Marcus knew better. Under that beautiful blanket of white, the cold waited, patient and deadly. He couldn't stay here forever. Eventually, he'd have to leave, find his way back to civilization, figure out what came next. But not today. Today, his leg wouldn't carry him another mile. Today, he needed to rest, to let his body recover from the ordeal of the night before. And if he was being honest with himself, he wanted to understand what this place was, why it existed, and why someone had walked away from it. Marcus stood carefully, testing his weight on his bad leg. It held, but barely. Every step sent sharp pains shooting up from his knee to his hip, the shrapnel wounds from Kandahar reminding him that some injuries never really healed. The military doctors had removed most of the metal fragments, but some pieces were too close to nerves, too embedded in muscle tissue to extract safely. So they'd left them there, little reminders of the day Marcus's life had split into before and after. He'd learned to live with the pain, to push through it when he had to accept it as his constant companion. But on cold mornings like this, after nights of pushing too hard, the pain went from background noise to a screaming alarm he couldn't ignore. He limped to the kitchen, his boots echoing on the hardwood floors. In the gray morning light, the house looked different than it had in the darkness, less mysterious, more sad. Dust covered everything in a thick blanket, cobwebs stretched across corners, and water stains marked the ceiling in places where the roof had leaked. The mansion was dying slowly, not from violence but from neglect. He opened the refrigerator, knowing it would be empty but needing to check. The interior was clean, spotless even, but completely bare. No forgotten condiments, no moldy leftovers, nothing. Whoever had left had cleaned out the perishables first. That spoke to planning, to intention. This wasn't an emergency evacuation. Someone had decided to leave and had taken the time to do it properly. Marcus moved through the downstairs rooms more carefully now, looking not just at the obvious things, but at the details. In the study, he found a desk with drawers that slid open smoothly despite years of disuse. Inside, office supplies sat neatly organized. Pens, paper clips, rubber bands, sticky notes. A stapler that still worked. Everything you'd need to run a home office, all of it carefully arranged and then abandoned. On the desk itself, a leather desk pad held nothing but a thin layer of dust and the ghost of where papers had once sat. Next to it, a pen holder shaped like a ship's wheel, the kind of nautical-themed decoration you'd pick up from a coastal vacation. It felt personal, chosen, loved. The bookshelves in the study told their own story. Marcus ran his finger along the spines, reading titles, classic literature mixed with contemporary fiction, biographies of musicians and actors, books on philosophy, on Buddhism, on finding peace in a chaotic world, poetry collections, some with bookmarks still tucked between pages, marking passages someone had wanted to return to. These weren't decorator books bought by the shelf to fill space. These were a reader's books, accumulated over time, each one selected with purpose. Marcus pulled one out at random, a worn copy of Jack Kerouac's On the Road. He opened it to find notes in the margins, underlining small drawings. Someone had lived with this book, absorbed it, made it their own. He found more photographs as he explored. In the hallway leading to the bedrooms, a series of frames hung on the wall, chronicling what looked like a life. Johnny younger, maybe in his 20s, with long hair and a leather jacket, standing on a city street. Johnny on a movie set, surrounded by crew members, everyone laughing at something off-camera. Johnny with the dark-haired woman from the photograph on the mantel, the two of them on a beach somewhere tropical, their feet in the surf. Johnny playing guitar on a small stage, lost in the music, his face peaceful in a way that suggested this was where he felt most himself. Each photo was a window into a life that had once been vibrant, full, real, but there were gaps in the timeline. The photos went from what looked like the early 2000s to around 2009 or 2010, and then they stopped. No recent pictures, no updated family portraits. It was as if time itself had frozen in this house 15 years ago, preserving everything exactly as it had been in that final moment before everyone left. Marcus climbed the stairs to the second floor, his hand gripping the banister tightly, his legs screaming with each step. The staircase was wide and grand, the kind you'd see in old movies, with carved wooden railings and a thick carpet runner down the center that had once been deep burgundy but had faded to a dusty rose. Portraits hung on the wall following the stairs upward, not of Johnny but of other people, family maybe, or friends. Faces frozen in oil paint, watching everyone who climbed these stairs with expressions that ranged from severe to serene. The second floor opened onto a wide hallway with doors on either side. Marcus opened the first one and found a guest bedroom. The bed was made with military precision, the corners tucked tight, the pillows arranged just so. A dresser stood against one wall, its surface clear except for a small lamp and a coaster. He opened the drawers, finding them empty. The closet held nothing but hangers and the smell of cedar. Whoever had slept here last had packed everything and left nothing behind. The next room was similar, another guest room, this one with twin beds instead of a queen. The third door opened into what must have been a child's room once, though it looked like it hadn't been used in years even before the house was abandoned. The walls were painted a soft yellow, and stick-on stars covered the ceiling, the kind that glowed in the dark. A rocking chair sat in the corner, and a bookshelf held children's books with worn spines and dog-eared pages. Dr. Seuss, Maurice Sendak, Shel Silverstein, the classics. But no toys, no clothes, no signs that a child had been here recently. Marcus stood in the doorway of that room longer than the others, something about it tugging at his chest. He thought of Emma, his daughter, who would be 16 now. He'd missed so much of her life, first because of deployments, then because of the divorce, and finally because of his own inability to keep his life together. He wondered what her room looked like now, if she still had stuffed animals, or if she'd packed them away as she grew older, if she'd covered her walls with posters of bands and actors, or if she preferred them plain. He wondered if she ever thought about him, if she ever missed him, or if he'd become just another ghost in her life, present in old photographs but absent from her daily reality. He closed the door and moved on. At the end of the hallway, a set of double doors stood closed. Marcus pushed them open and stepped into the master bedroom. This room was different. Bigger, obviously, but also more personal. The bed was enormous, king-sized, with an ornate headboard carved from dark wood. The sheets and comforter were still on it, pulled up neatly but with the impression of someone having slept there, the pillows still holding the ghost of a head's shape. On the nightstands, books sat stacked, their bookmarks still in place. On one side, biographies and music theory. On the other, novels and poetry. His and hers, Marcus thought, two people with different tastes sharing the same space. The walls held more photographs, but these were different from the ones downstairs. More intimate, Johnny and the woman in everyday moments, cooking together in the kitchen, reading on the couch, walking through snow-covered woods. These weren't posed shots for magazines. These were life, real and unfiltered, and in every single one, both of them looked happy. Not celebrity happy, not red carpet happy, but genuinely, peacefully happy. Like they'd found something rare and were holding on to it with both hands. Marcus moved to the dresser and opened the top drawer. It slid out smoothly, revealing neatly folded clothes. Men's clothes, expensive-looking, still arranged as if their owner might return at any moment. T-shirts, button-downs, sweaters, all high quality, all well cared for. The next drawer held socks and underwear, also neatly organized. The third held jeans, each pair folded identically. Everything spoke to order, to routine, to a life that had been carefully constructed and then suddenly stopped. On top of the dresser sat a wooden box, small and elegant, with inlaid mother-of-pearl designs on the lid. Marcus opened it carefully. Inside, he found watches. Not one or two, but at least a dozen, each one sitting in its own padded slot. Marcus didn't know much about expensive watches, but even he could tell these were special. Some looked vintage, with leather bands worn soft with age. Others were modern, sleek, with metal bands that caught the light. One had a face so complicated with tiny dials within dials that Marcus couldn't begin to guess how to read it. These weren't just watches. They were a collection, carefully curated, probably worth more money than Marcus would see in a lifetime. The closet was a walk-in, bigger than some apartments Marcus had lived in. One side held men's clothes, the other women's. Suits, dresses, jeans, casual shirts, leather jackets, coats. Everything organized by type and color. Shoes lined the bottom, dozens of pairs from sneakers to boots to dress shoes that probably cost more than Marcus's car had. And at the very back of the closet, hanging alone on a rod, was a costume. Marcus stepped closer, his heart beating faster. A pirate's costume, complete with a long coat, a vest with buttons shaped like skulls, a belt with an elaborate buckle, and a bandana. He reached out and touched the fabric. Authentic. This wasn't a Halloween costume bought at a party store. This was the real thing. A costume from a movie set, from Pirates of the Caribbean. Marcus backed out of the closet, his mind racing. This wasn't just Johnny Depp's vacation home or investment property. This was a place he'd lived, really lived, with someone he cared about. A refuge from the chaos of fame. A sanctuary where he could be himself instead of the character the world expected him to play. And for some reason, he'd walked away from it. Left behind his clothes, his watches, his books, his photographs, his entire life, and never came back. Why? What could make someone abandon something this complete, this carefully built? Marcus limped to the windows and opened the shutters, flooding the room with brilliant winter light. The view took his breath away. The mansion sat on the edge of a cliff, and from this window you could see for miles. Snow-covered mountains stretched to the horizon, peaks sharp against the blue sky. Pine forests filled the valleys, and far below, a frozen river wound through the landscape like a silver ribbon. It was beautiful, almost painfully so, the kind of view that made you understand why people wrote poetry and painted pictures and tried desperately to capture moments that couldn't be held. Someone had stood at this window every morning and seen this. Someone had chosen this room, this view, this life. And then they'd left it all behind. Marcus turned away from the window, his leg throbbing. He needed to sit, to rest, to give his body a chance to recover before he explored any further. But something caught his eye. Near the fireplace in the master bedroom, built into the wall, was a bookshelf, and one section of it, about 3 feet wide, looked slightly different from the rest. The wood grain didn't quite match. The books on that section looked staged, arranged too perfectly, their spines too evenly aligned. Marcus had seen enough spy movies to recognize what he was looking at. A hidden door. His heart began to pound. He limped over to the bookshelf and ran his hands along the edges of the suspicious section, looking for a latch or button or some way to open it. His fingers found a small indentation in the wood, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. He pressed it. Something clicked deep in the wall, and the section of bookshelf swung inward on smooth hinges, revealing darkness beyond. Marcus grabbed his flashlight, praying it still had enough battery to see by, and stepped through the opening. He found himself in a narrow corridor, maybe 3 feet wide, that ran alongside the bedroom. The walls were plain drywall, unfinished, clearly not meant to be seen. This was a secret space, hidden from casual observers, built for a purpose. The corridor extended about 20 feet and then turned sharply to the right. Marcus followed it, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. The passage led to a steep staircase, narrow and cramped, nothing like the grand staircase in the main part of the house. These stairs went up, not down, climbing toward what Marcus realized must be the 3rd floor. He climbed slowly, his bad leg screaming in protest. Every step was agony, his knee threatening to give out, his hip joint grinding in ways that made his stomach turn. But he kept going, driven by something he couldn't name. Curiosity, maybe, or desperation, or just the simple human need to understand the mystery he'd stumbled into. At the top of the stairs, another door. This one wasn't hidden. It was solid wood, heavy, with a simple handle. Marcus turned it and pushed. The door opened onto a hallway he hadn't seen before, narrower than the ones below, with lower ceilings and simpler finishes. The servants' quarters, maybe, or staff rooms. Places where the people who made the mansion run had lived and worked, invisible to the guests below. Marcus explored the rooms up here quickly. Small bedrooms, simply furnished, with single beds and basic dressers. A bathroom with plain white fixtures and no luxury touches. A storage room filled with linens and cleaning supplies, all neatly organized on metal shelves. And at the end of the hallway, a room that was different from all the others. The door was closed, and unlike the others, which had simple handles, this one had a lock. An old-fashioned keyhole, the kind you'd need an actual key for, not a modern push-button or keycard system. Marcus tried the handle. Locked. He stepped back and looked at the door more carefully. It was newer than the others, or at least better maintained. The wood was smooth, not dusty like everything else. Someone had cared about this door, about what lay behind it, even after abandoning the rest of the house. Marcus thought about kicking it in. His military training had taught him how to breach doors, and this one didn't look particularly sturdy. But something stopped him. Some sense that whatever was behind this door was important, maybe too important, to damage in the process of getting to it. He needed to find the key. He searched the other rooms on the 3rd floor, opening drawers, checking under mattresses, feeling along the tops of door frames for hidden keys. Nothing. He went back downstairs, his leg barely supporting him now, and searched the master bedroom. The dresser drawers, the nightstands, the pockets of jackets in the closet. Still nothing. He checked the study, rifling through drawers, feeling under the desk, opening the filing cabinet. Papers, lots of papers, but no keys. He was about to give up when he remembered the wooden box on the dresser. The watch collection. Marcus limped back upstairs and opened the box again. He removed the tray that held the watches, looking underneath. And there, in the bottom of the box, underneath a layer of soft felt, were keys. Not just 1 or 2, but at least 20, all different sizes and shapes, all carefully labeled with tiny tags. Pool house, garage, wine cellar, guest cottage, front gate, and one, smaller than the others, that simply read, office. Marcus held it up to the light. It looked old, brass, worn smooth with use. He took it and headed back to the 3rd floor, hope and dread mixing in his chest in equal measure. The key slid into the lock smoothly, as if it had been waiting for this moment. It turned with a soft click, and the door swung open. What happens next will turn this frozen mansion into something more than shelter, reveal a truth nobody expected, and remind us why sometimes the quietest secrets carry the most weight. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The room beyond the door was small, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with a single window that let in pale winter light. But it wasn't the size that made Marcus's breath catch. It was what the room contained. A desk, simple but sturdy, sat against one wall. On top of it, stacks of leather-bound notebooks, at least 30 or 40 of them, all identical, all carefully arranged. Behind the desk, filing cabinets lined the wall, 4 of them, each one with neat labels on the drawers. Beside the filing cabinets, a safe, not a small personal safe, but a proper vault, the kind you'd see in a bank, standing 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide, its steel surface dull gray in the winter light. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, his heart hammering. This wasn't just an office. This was a vault, a place where someone had stored their most important possessions, their most valuable secrets. He stepped inside, his boots sounding too loud in the small space, and approached the desk. He picked up one of the leather notebooks and opened it. Inside, handwriting, neat and precise, filled page after page. Journal entries dated and detailed, written in blue ink that had faded only slightly over the years. Marcus flipped to the first entry, March 15, 2010. He began to read. Bought this place to disappear. Hollywood was eating me alive. Every day was cameras, questions, expectations I couldn't meet. I felt like I was drowning in my own life, like the person I saw in the mirror wasn't me anymore, but some character I'd been playing so long I'd forgotten how to stop. Needed somewhere quiet, somewhere no one would find me, somewhere I could remember who I was before all of this. This mansion, hidden in the mountains of Colorado, felt right the moment I saw it. Isolated, peaceful, no neighbors, no paparazzi, no one demanding pieces of me I didn't have left to give. Maybe here I can figure out who Johnny is when he's not being Johnny Depp. Marcus read on, fascinated despite himself. The entries continued for weeks, chronicling the process of settling into the mansion, of hiring contractors to renovate certain rooms, of slowly, carefully building a life separate from fame. Johnny wrote about playing guitar for hours, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. About reading books he'd been meaning to get to for years. About cooking actual meals instead of eating restaurant food. About walking through the forest with no destination, no schedule, no one watching. The entries were peaceful at first, almost meditative, the words of someone who'd finally found what they'd been looking for. But then the tone began to shift. June 8, 2010. Someone's been asking questions. A reporter from some tabloid showed up in the town 15 miles away, asking locals if they'd seen me. How did they find out? I thought I was so careful. Used shell companies to buy the property, paid in cash, kept everything off the books. But money leaves a trail. Fame leaves a trail. You can't ever really disappear, not when the whole world thinks they own you. I need to be smarter. Need to protect what I've built here. This is the only place I have left that's mine. Marcus flipped forward through the journal, watching as the peaceful entries gave way to ones tinged with paranoia, with fear. Johnny wrote about installing security systems, about background checking everyone who came near the property, about moving his finances around to make them harder to trace. He wrote about feeling watched even in this isolated place, about seeing photographers in his dreams, about the constant low-level anxiety that came with being one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. August 23, 2010. Move the accounts today. Set up the safe in the attic. If something happens, if this all goes sideways, at least everything will be secure. The lawyer thinks I'm paranoid, but he doesn't understand. When you're famous, you're never really safe. Not your money, not your privacy, not even your thoughts. Someone's always trying to take something. At least here, in this room, I can control who has access. No one knows about this place. No one can touch what's in that safe. It's mine, and it's staying that way. The attic. Marcus looked up at the ceiling, his pulse quickening. He'd assumed the third floor was the top of the house, but of course there would be an attic. Old mansions like this always had attics, spaces tucked under the eaves where families stored things they didn't need but couldn't throw away. He continued reading, searching for more references to the attic, to the safe, to what might be inside it. But the later entries grew shorter, less detailed, as if Johnny had been too tired or too discouraged to write much. The final entry was dated November 30th, 2010. Marcus read it slowly, feeling the weight of every word. I can't do this anymore. The pressure doesn't stop just because I'm hiding. It follows me. Phone calls from my agent, my publicist, my lawyer, all of them saying I have obligations, commitments, appearances I promised to make. They don't understand that I'm not hiding from work. I'm hiding from myself, from the person I've become, from the life that doesn't feel like mine anymore. I thought this place would save me, would give me space to breathe and remember who I was. But it's just another cage, prettier than Hollywood but still confining. I'm leaving. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay here. Maybe Europe, maybe somewhere even more remote. Maybe I'll just drive until I run out of road. This house and everything in it stays frozen until I figure out what comes next. Maybe someday, when the world forgets about me, when I'm old enough that no one cares anymore, I'll come back. But not now, not yet. I need to keep running. Marcus closed the journal, his hands trembling. Johnny Depp hadn't abandoned this mansion. He'd fled from it, chased away by the very fame he'd been trying to escape. And in his desperation to get away, he'd left everything behind. His clothes, his books, his photographs, his journals, his secrets. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Marcus stood and moved to the filing cabinets. He opened the first drawer, finding it filled with financial documents, bank statements, investment records, tax returns, all carefully organized and labeled. The amounts made Marcus's head spin. Millions of dollars moving between accounts, earnings from movies, residuals, endorsement deals, numbers so large they stopped meaning anything. The second drawer held contracts, thick stacks of legal documents detailing movie deals, appearance agreements, merchandising rights. The third drawer was personal papers, birth certificates, property deeds, insurance policies, the paperwork that proved a life existed in the eyes of the law. And the fourth drawer held letters, hundreds of them, bound in bundles with rubber bands. Fan mail mostly, addressed to Johnny Depp, care of various studios and agencies. Some had been opened and read, others still sealed, as if he'd stopped being able to face them. Marcus didn't read the letters. They felt too intimate, too personal, like reading someone's diary without permission. But their existence told him something important. Johnny Depp hadn't just walked away from fame. He'd walked away from connection, from the people who admired him, from the weight of being responsible for so many strangers' happiness and dreams. Marcus turned his attention to the safe. It stood against the wall like a silent sentinel, its steel surface cold and unyielding. He approached it slowly, his leg throbbing with every step, and examined it carefully. The safe was old but well made. Probably from the 1970s or 80s, the kind of vault that banks used before everything went digital. It had a combination lock, the old-fashioned kind with a dial that you turned left and right in a specific sequence. No keypad, no electronic display, just numbers etched into metal. Marcus tried the handle, knowing it wouldn't budge, locked tight. He stepped back and looked around the room, searching for any clue to the combination. Nothing obvious. No numbers written on papers, no codes tucked in drawers. But Johnny had left the key to this room where someone could find it. That suggested he'd wanted someone to be able to access this space eventually. So maybe, somewhere in these journals, there was a clue to opening the safe. Marcus sat at the desk and began going through the journals more systematically, looking for any mention of numbers, of combinations, of codes. He found plenty of dates, amounts of money, addresses, phone numbers, but nothing that seemed like it might open the safe. He was about to give up when something caught his eye. In one of the middle journals, Johnny had written about becoming a father, about the moment his daughter Lily Rose was born, about holding her for the first time and realizing his life would never be the same. The entry was long, emotional, filled with joy and terror in equal measure, and at the end, underlined 3 times, Johnny had written, May 27th, 1999, the day everything changed, the day I became someone worth being. May 27th, 1999. Marcus stared at the numbers, 5, 27, 99. It could be a combination. The kind of number you'd remember forever, the kind you'd choose when you needed something important, something secure, something that meant everything. He stood and limped back to the safe, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. He reached out and touched the dial, cold metal under his fingertips. Left first or right? He didn't know the proper technique for combination safes, but he'd seen it done in movies. Start with a few spins to clear any previous attempts, then begin the sequence. He turned the dial right several times, letting it spin freely, then stopped at 5. The dial clicked softly. He turned it left, counting the numbers as they passed under the indicator line, stopping at 27. Another click, quieter this time. He turned it right again, his hand shaking now, and stopped at 99. For a moment, nothing happened. Marcus stood there, his hand on the dial, holding his breath. Then he heard it, a deep mechanical thunk from inside the safe, the sound of heavy bolts sliding free. The lock had released. Marcus grabbed the handle, heavy steel cold in his grip, and pulled. The door was thick, at least 6 inches of solid metal, and it moved slowly on hinges that groaned despite being well made. Light from the window spilled into the safe's interior, illuminating what lay inside. And what Marcus saw made him stagger backward, his bad leg giving out completely, sending him crashing to his knees on the wooden floor. Money, stacks and stacks of money, bundled in plastic wrap, filling the entire interior of the safe from top to bottom. But that wasn't what had made Marcus fall. It was the sheer amount of it. More money than he'd ever seen in one place, more money than he'd imagined could fit in a single safe. And on top of the stacks, a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery, in the same neat handwriting from the journals. Marcus crawled forward, his hands shaking, and pulled the letter free. Marcus stayed on his knees for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, staring at the contents of the safe like he was looking at something from another world. The bundles of cash were pristine, still wrapped in their original bank packaging, hundreds stacked with hundreds, 50s with 50s, all of them crisp and clean as if they'd been deposited yesterday instead of 15 years ago. Each bundle was thick, maybe an inch of compressed bills, and there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. They filled the safe completely, stacked with military precision from the bottom to the top shelf, organized by denomination, creating a wall of money that seemed to pulse in the pale winter light. His hands shook as he reached for the letter sitting on top of the first stack. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind you'd use for important correspondence or legal documents. The handwriting was the same as the journals, neat and controlled, but there was something different about it here. The letters were larger, pressed harder into the paper, as if whoever wrote this had been gripping the pen too tightly, fighting to keep their hand steady. Marcus unfolded it carefully, his vision blurring slightly at the edges. He blinked hard, forcing himself to focus, and began to read. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this letter, then something went wrong. Either I didn't make it back, or I chose not to come back, or the world finally caught up with me in a way I couldn't escape. I don't know which it'll be. I'm writing this on December 1st, 2010, the day before I leave this place for what I think will be the last time. I've spent 8 months here, 8 months trying to disappear, trying to find some version of myself that isn't constantly performing, constantly aware of cameras and expectations and the weight of being someone the world thinks they know. It didn't work. You can't escape yourself no matter how far you run or how well you hide. But I tried. God, I tried. This money, $265 million, isn't stolen. It's not illegal. It's mine, earned from movies and endorsements and all the ways Hollywood turns talent into profit. But it's also not really mine, not anymore. The moment you become famous, everything you have becomes public property in a way. People think they have a right to know how much you make, where you spend it, what you do with it. Financial advisors want to invest it. Managers want their cut. The government wants its taxes. Everyone wants a piece, and after a while, you forget what it feels like to have something that's just yours. So I hid it, moved it slowly, carefully, over months, converting assets to cash, pulling from different accounts so no one transaction would raise flags. I told my business manager I was diversifying, which was true in a way. I told my accountant I was making a large purchase, which was also true. Nobody knew the full picture except me, and once I had it all here, in this safe, in this house that no one knew about, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. This was mine, not my agents, not my managers, not the studios, mine. I know how this sounds. I know it makes me seem paranoid, maybe crazy, but when you've lived in the public eye as long as I have, when you've had photographers follow your children to school and tabloids print lies about your marriage, and strangers feel entitled to your time and attention every moment of every day, paranoia stops feeling like a mental illness and starts feeling like survival. This money was my insurance policy, my escape plan. If everything fell apart, if the industry chewed me up and spit me out like it does to so many people, if I needed to disappear completely and start over somewhere no one would find me, this was how I'd do it. $265 million is enough to live on for the rest of your life if you're careful. Enough to take care of the people you love, enough to buy freedom, which is the one thing money can actually purchase. But I never used it. I'm leaving it here, locked in this safe, in this house, in this secret room that I built specifically to hold the parts of my life I couldn't carry anymore. Maybe someday I'll come back for it. Maybe I'll need it. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll figure out how to live without needing an escape hatch, without constantly planning for disaster. I don't know. All I know is that right now, today, I can't be here anymore. This place was supposed to save me, but it just reminded me that you can't hide from your own life. You can only live it or run from it, and I'm tired of running. If you found this, I hope you use it better than I did. I hope you find the freedom I was searching for, and I hope you understand that sometimes the richest people in the world are the loneliest, because we have everything except the one thing that matters: the ability to just be. Johnny. Marcus's hands were shaking so hard now that the paper rustled like leaves in wind. He read the letter 3 more times, each reading hitting him differently. The first time, shock. The second time, understanding. The third time, a grief so deep it made his chest ache. He folded the letter carefully and set it aside, then turned his attention back to the safe. $265 million. The number was so large his brain couldn't fully process it. He'd never made more than $40,000 in a year, even at his peak when he was working full-time as a mechanic before the injury, before the medical bills, before everything fell apart. $265 million was more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, more money than most people would see across generations of their family. And it was sitting in front of him, in cash, in a safe that he'd opened with a dead man's birthday. Except Johnny Depp wasn't dead. He was still out there somewhere, still making movies, still living his life, probably having forgotten this place even existed. Which meant this money wasn't abandoned, it was just hidden. And taking it would be theft, pure and simple, no matter how badly Marcus needed it. He sat back against the desk, his legs stretched out in front of him, the pain radiating up through his hip and into his spine. He closed his eyes and let himself remember. Afghanistan. 2017. The heat had been unbearable that day, the kind that made your uniform stick to your skin and turned your canteen water lukewarm within minutes of filling it. Marcus had been on patrol with his unit outside Kandahar, walking point because he was good at it, because his eyes were sharp and his instincts sharper. They'd been sweeping a village that intelligence said was clear. No hostile activity, just farmers trying to live their lives while two armies fought around them. Marcus had been thinking about Emma when it happened. She'd been 9 years old, and he'd missed her birthday because of the deployment. He'd sent a card, but it wouldn't arrive for weeks, and by then the moment would have passed. He was thinking about her smile, about the way she used to run to him when he came home from work, about how he was missing all of it while he walked through dust and heat looking for threats that might not even be there. That's when his boot hit the pressure plate. He remembered the sound first, a click so soft he almost didn't hear it. Then understanding, cold and instant. IED. Improvised explosive device. The insurgents buried them everywhere, in roads, in doorways, in fields where children played. Some were sophisticated, remotely detonated, carefully planned. Others were simple. Step here, die here. Marcus had maybe half a second to process what was happening before the world exploded. The blast threw him backward 15 feet. He remembered flying, remembered the strange silence that came after the initial boom, his eardrums blown out, his hearing replaced by a high-pitched ringing that would never fully go away. He landed hard, his back slamming into a mud brick wall, and for a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't understand why the sky was spinning. Then the pain hit. His right leg felt like it was on fire, like someone had poured gasoline on it and lit a match. He looked down and immediately wished he hadn't. His uniform was shredded from the knee down, and beneath the torn fabric he could see blood. So much blood, and pieces of metal embedded in his flesh, jagged chunks of the bomb casing mixed with rocks and dirt and fragments of his own shattered bone. He'd screamed then. Couldn't help it. The kind of scream that came from somewhere deeper than your lungs, somewhere primal and raw. His brothers were there instantly, dragging him behind cover, shouting for the medic, applying tourniquets with hands that shook because they'd seen too many guys bleed out in the dirt. The medic, a 23-year-old kid from Ohio whose name Marcus could never remember later, had worked on him with steady hands and a calm voice, talking him through it, telling him he was going to make it, that he'd be okay, that they'd get him to the hospital. Marcus had believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. But 3 others hadn't made it. The IED had been placed in a cluster, multiple devices linked together, and when Marcus triggered the first one, the others had detonated in sequence. His best friend, a guy named Torres from Texas who'd shown Marcus photos of his newborn son just that morning, had been too close to the second blast. He died instantly, his body shield for Marcus, taking shrapnel that would have killed Marcus if Torres hadn't been there. 2 others, younger guys Marcus had been training, had been caught by the third device. One died in the helicopter on the way to the field hospital. The other made it through surgery but died 2 days later from infections his body couldn't fight. Marcus had survived. Barely. They'd pulled most of the shrapnel from his leg, but some pieces were too deep, too close to nerves and blood vessels to remove without risking permanent paralysis or amputation. So they'd left them there. Little reminders of the day Marcus's life split into before and after. He'd spent 6 months in recovery, first at the military hospital in Germany, then at Walter Reed in Washington, then finally at a VA facility in Colorado. The doctors told him he was lucky, he'd walk again, he'd have a mostly normal life. But the leg would never be what it was. The pain would be constant. And he'd need surgery eventually, procedures to remove the remaining fragments before they caused more damage, before they shifted and severed something vital. But surgery cost money. The VA covered some of it, but not all. Not the specialists he needed, not the advanced procedures that might actually restore function instead of just preventing deterioration. He'd been quoted $90,000 for the full treatment, a number that might as well have been $9 million for all the chance Marcus had of paying it. So he'd lived with the pain, popped pills that barely helped, and watched his life slowly spiral away from him. He'd lost his job because he couldn't stand for 8-hour shifts, lost his apartment because he couldn't pay rent without work. Lost his marriage because Kelly couldn't handle the mood swings, the depression, the nights he woke up screaming from nightmares where he was back in Afghanistan watching Torres die over and over. And finally he'd lost himself, becoming one of the invisible people who lived on the streets, who slept in shelters when there was room and under bridges when there wasn't, who collected cans and begged for change and tried to remember what it felt like to be whole. Marcus opened his eyes, the memory fading, replaced by the reality of where he was, kneeling on the floor of a mansion that belonged to one of the most famous people in the world, staring at enough money to solve every problem he'd ever had. With $265 million, he could get the surgery. He could buy a house. He could find Emma and give her everything he'd never been able to provide: college tuition, a car, a father who wasn't broken and homeless and ashamed. He could repay everyone who'd ever helped him, every shelter that had given him a bed, every soup kitchen that had fed him, every church that had handed him a coat or a pair of socks. He could start a foundation for veterans, help other guys like him who'd fallen through the cracks, who'd served their country and been discarded when they came home damaged. He could do so much good with this money. Real, tangible, life-changing good, but it wasn't his money. That fact sat in his chest like a stone. Johnny Depp had earned this, had hidden it, yes, and apparently forgotten about it. But that didn't change ownership. Marcus had been raised to believe in right and wrong, in honor and duty, in doing the hard thing because it was the right thing. His grandfather, the man who'd raised him after his parents proved they couldn't, had hammered those values into him. You don't take what isn't yours. You don't lie. You don't cheat. You stand up when it would be easier to stay down. You help people weaker than you. You keep your word. Simple rules for a complicated world. And Marcus had tried to live by them, even when it cost him, even when it would have been easier to compromise. He thought about Torres, about the way his friend had always talked about doing the right thing even when nobody was watching. Torres believed that character was what you did when you were alone, when there were no consequences, when you could take the easy path and no one would ever know. He'd been a good man, the kind who sent half his paycheck home to his mother, who volunteered at the local school when they were stateside, who never complained even when they were stuck on the worst details. And he died protecting Marcus, throwing himself between his friend and the blast, making a choice in a fraction of a second that had saved Marcus's life and ended his own. What would Torres say if he could see Marcus now? What would he think about Marcus taking this money, justifying it because he needed it, because he deserved it after everything he'd been through? Marcus picked up one of the bundles of cash, feeling the weight of it in his hands. The bills were hundreds, crisp and clean, maybe $10,000 in this single stack. He could take just this one bundle. No one would miss it. 265 million minus 10,000 was still 264,990,000. Johnny Depp would never notice. Marcus could use the 10,000 to get back on his feet, find an apartment, buy some work clothes, maybe get a down payment on the surgery. Just this one bundle. That wouldn't really be stealing, would it? It would be survival. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. Theft was theft, regardless of the amount. Taking 10,000 was no different morally than taking 10 million. The size of the crime didn't change the nature of it. And once he took that first bundle, what would stop him from taking another? And another? Until he'd justified taking all of it. Until he'd become exactly the kind of person his grandfather had warned him never to be. He put the bundle back, his hands shaking. He needed to think. Needed to understand fully what he was dealing with before he made any decisions. He turned his attention to the documents in the safe, pulling them out carefully. Beneath the stacks of cash were folders, legal documents, bank statements, transfer records. Marcus spread them across the desk and began reading. The documents told the story Johnny's letter had summarized. Over a period of 8 months, from March through November of 2010, Johnny had systematically moved money from various accounts into cash. Not all at once, which would have raised red flags, but gradually. 1 million here, 5 million there, 10 million from this account, 20 million from that one. Each transaction had been documented, recorded, legal. Johnny had paid taxes on it, declared it as income or capital gains or whatever the appropriate category was. He hadn't hidden the money from the government. He'd just hidden it from everyone else. The bank statements showed the accounts the money had come from. Checking accounts, savings accounts, investment portfolios, trusts set up for his children. All legitimate sources, all Johnny's money by law. The transfer records showed how it had been moved, converted to cashier's checks, then exchanged for cash at various banks across multiple states. The process must have taken months, required coordination with multiple financial institutions, and probably raised some eyebrows. But Johnny Depp was rich enough and famous enough that banks didn't question him. Rich people did strange things with their money all the time, and as long as it was legal, the banks didn't care. At the bottom of the stack, Marcus found something that made his stomach drop. A notarized letter of intent dated November 30th, 2010, the same day as the last journal entry. The letter was addressed to Johnny's attorney and business manager, and it laid out exactly what was supposed to happen to this money. In the event of my death or permanent incapacitation, the contents of the safe at the Colorado property should be distributed as follows. 50 million to my children, divided equally between them, held in trust until they turn 25. 50 million to the Motion Picture and Television Fund to support aging actors and crew members who helped build this industry. 25 million to veterans organizations, split between Wounded Warrior Project and the VA's Homeless Prevention Program. 25 million to environmental conservation groups. 25 million to arts education programs for underprivileged children. The remaining 90 million to be used to maintain the Colorado property as a private retreat for actors, musicians, and artists who need time away from public life, free of charge, no publicity, just sanctuary. Marcus read the letter 3 times, his throat getting tighter with each reading. Johnny had planned for this. He'd thought about what would happen to the money if he died, if something went wrong, if he never came back. And he'd chosen to give it away, not to keep it in his family or leave it moldering in a safe, but to use it for good, for people who needed help, for causes that mattered, for creating something meaningful instead of just accumulating wealth. The letter was dated the day before Johnny left, which meant it had been one of the last things he'd done before abandoning this place. But the letter had never been delivered. It sat here in the safe, along with the money, both of them forgotten when Johnny fled and never looked back. Marcus leaned back in the chair, his mind racing. This changed everything. The money wasn't just hidden, it was designated. Johnny had already decided what should be done with it. And if Marcus took it, he wouldn't just be stealing from a rich celebrity who wouldn't miss it. He'd be stealing from veterans, from sick actors, from kids who needed art programs, from conservation efforts, from all the good this money was supposed to do. He'd be taking not just cash, but hope, opportunity, future lives changed for the better. How could he do that? How could he look at himself in the mirror knowing he'd stolen not from wealth, but from need? But another voice in his head pushed back. The letter was 15 years old. The money had sat here untouched for a decade and a half. Johnny hadn't come back for it, hadn't executed the letter of intent, hadn't done any of the charitable things he'd planned. Maybe he'd forgotten. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he'd written the letter in a moment of guilt or sentimentality and then moved on with his life, no longer caring about any of it. And if that was true, if Johnny really had abandoned this money with no intention of ever using it, then wasn't letting it sit here a bigger waste than taking it? At least Marcus would use it for something. At least it would go to someone who desperately needed it instead of gathering dust in a forgotten safe. Marcus stood up, his legs screaming in protest, and limped to the window. Outside, the sun was starting to set, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was beautiful, breathtaking, the kind of view that reminded you the world was bigger than your problems. He thought about Emma, about the last time he'd seen her 3 years ago. She'd been 13, on the edge of becoming a teenager, still willing to hug him, but pulling away faster than she used to. They'd met for lunch at a diner in California, Kelly supervising from a nearby table, making sure Marcus didn't upset Emma or cause a scene. He'd brought her a present, a necklace with a tiny airplane charm because she'd once said she wanted to be a pilot. She'd thanked him politely but hadn't put it on, and when lunch was over she'd hugged him quickly and run back to Kelly without looking back. That had been the last time. He'd tried to arrange other visits, but Kelly always had reasons why it wouldn't work. Emma had school. Emma had friends' birthdays. Emma was going through a hard time and needed stability. Eventually, Marcus stopped asking, stopped calling, stopped sending letters because the silence that came back hurt worse than no contact at all. He told himself it was better this way, better for Emma to have a stable life without a broken father dragging her down, better for her to remember him from before, when he'd been strong and whole and someone she could be proud of. But deep down, he knew the truth. He'd given up. He'd let his shame and his pain drive him away from the one person who mattered most. And now, with $265 million sitting in a safe behind him, he had the chance to change that, to become someone Emma could be proud of again, to show her that her father wasn't a quitter, wasn't a failure, wasn't just another casualty of a war that had ended years ago. But he'd have to steal to do it. He'd have to become a thief, a liar, someone who took what didn't belong to him and justified it with need. Could he live with that? Could he look Emma in the eye someday and tell her he'd built their new life on stolen money? Or would the guilt eat him alive, corroding everything good he tried to build, until he was right back where he started, broken and alone and ashamed? Marcus turned away from the window and looked at the safe again. The bundles of cash seemed to glow in the dying light, tempting, impossible, dangerous. He thought about Torres, about the choice his friend had made in a fraction of a second, to throw himself between Marcus and death, to give up everything so Marcus could live. Torres hadn't hesitated, hadn't calculated the cost or weighed his options. He'd just acted, doing what he believed was right even though it cost him everything. What would right look like here? What would Torres do if he were standing in this room, looking at this money, facing this choice? Marcus already knew the answer. Torres would walk away, would close the safe, lock the door, and find some way to return everything to its rightful owner. Because that's what good men did. They did the hard thing, the right thing, even when it cost them everything, even when it meant staying broken while healing sat within reach. Marcus pulled out his phone, the burner he'd been carrying for months, its battery almost dead, its screen cracked. He had maybe an hour of power left, enough to make a call, to do what needed to be done. But his finger hovered over the screen, unable to dial, because once he made this call, once he set events in motion, there would be no going back. He'd lose his only chance at salvation, his only shot at getting his life back, his only hope of seeing Emma again and being someone she could love instead of pity. The sun slipped below the mountains and the room fell into shadow. Marcus stood in the darkness, the phone in his hand, $265 million behind him, and the weight of the hardest decision he'd ever faced pressing down on his shoulders like the world itself. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He sat in the office on the 3rd floor, the safe door still open behind him, the letter from Johnny Depp resting on the desk where he'd placed it hours ago. His phone lay beside it, battery icon blinking red, warning him he had maybe 30 minutes of power left before it died completely. Outside the window, stars filled the sky, so many of them, bright and cold and distant. He'd seen stars like this in Afghanistan, during those rare quiet moments between patrols when the world felt almost peaceful. Torres used to say the stars looked the same everywhere, That no matter where you were or what you were going through, you could look up and remember you were part of something bigger than your own small life. Marcus picked up his phone and stared at the dark screen. One call. That's all it would take. He could find Johnny Depp's management contact or his lawyer, or even just call the police and report what he'd found. One call, and this burden would shift from his shoulders to someone else's. The money would be returned. The letter of intent would be executed. The charities would get their funding. Emma would never know her father had even been here, would never know he'd stood at the edge of taking $265 million and chosen to walk away. His life would go back to exactly what it had been, homeless, broken, invisible. The thought made his chest ache. But something Torres had told him years ago kept echoing in his mind. They'd been sitting in the mess tent in Kandahar, both of them exhausted from a patrol that had lasted 18 hours in 100-degree heat. Marcus had been complaining about something. He couldn't even remember what now. Maybe the food or the heat or the boredom between missions. And Torres had looked at him with those steady brown eyes and said something Marcus had never forgotten. You know what separates the good guys from the bad guys? It's not talent or luck or even courage. It's what you do when nobody's watching. When you could take the easy path and no one would ever know. That's when you find out who you really are. Marcus had laughed it off at the time, made some joke about Torres being too philosophical for a guy who grew up working on his dad's ranch. But Torres had been serious. I'm not kidding, man. Anyone can do the right thing when there are consequences for doing wrong. That's just self-preservation. Real character is doing right when you could get away with wrong, when it costs you something, when it hurts. And then, 3 weeks later, Torres had proven it, had thrown himself between Marcus and a bomb, had made the ultimate sacrifice, had shown with his final act exactly who he was when nobody was watching. Nobody except Marcus. And that moment had defined the rest of Marcus's life, had become the measuring stick against which he judged every choice, every action, every moment of weakness or strength. Marcus picked up the phone and turned it on. The screen glowed in the darkness, washing his face in pale blue light. His hands were steady now, not shaking anymore because he'd finally made his decision. Not the easy one, not the one that would save him, but the one Torres would have made. The one that let him look at himself in the mirror. The one that honored the man who died so Marcus could have this moment. He opened the browser on his phone, watching the battery percentage drop as the phone searched for a signal. 2 bars. Weak, but enough. He typed Johnny Depp management contact into the search bar and waited while the page loaded. Several results came up, most of them outdated or fake. Fan sites pretending to offer contact information. But one looked legitimate, a talent agency website with a professional layout and verified contact forms. Marcus clicked through to the contact page and found an email address for media inquiries. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. He opened his email app, created a new message, and started typing. His thumbs felt too big for the small keyboard, and he had to delete and retype several times, but eventually he got the words right. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, honorably discharged. I'm currently homeless, and last night I took shelter from a blizzard in what I believed was an abandoned mansion in the Colorado mountains. Inside I found personal belongings, journals, and financial documents that I believe belonged to Johnny Depp. There's also a significant amount of cash and a letter explaining its intended purpose. I haven't taken anything. Everything is exactly as I found it. I'm reaching out because this property and its contents should be returned to their rightful owner. I need someone to contact me as soon as possible. This is time sensitive. My phone battery is dying and I may not have power for much longer. He added his phone number, read the message 3 times to make sure it was clear, and hit send. The message disappeared into the digital void, and Marcus sat back, wondering if anyone would even see it, if it would get lost in spam filters or ignored by some overworked assistant who got 1,000 emails a day from people claiming to have important information. The battery icon blinked again. 20%. He needed to conserve what power he had in case someone actually responded. He turned off the screen and sat in the darkness, waiting. An hour passed, then 2. Marcus dozed off at some point, his head resting on his arms on the desk, his bad legs stretched out in front of him. He woke to the sound of his phone buzzing, the vibration loud against the wooden surface. He grabbed it, his heart pounding, and looked at the screen. Unknown number. 3% battery. He answered. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was female, professional, cautious. "Is this Marcus Webb?" "Yes." "Mr. Webb, my name is Samantha Gray. I'm an attorney who represents Johnny Depp. I received your email about 30 minutes ago. I need to verify some information. Can you tell me where you are right now?" Marcus gave her the address from the documents he'd found, reading off the street name and property number. He heard typing on the other end, then a long pause. "Mr. Webb, that property has been off our radar for over 15 years. We believed it had been sold or abandoned. Can you describe what you found inside?" Marcus did, carefully, methodically, describing the journals, the photographs, the letter of intent, the safe. He didn't mention the specific amount of money, just that there was cash and it appeared to be significant. Another pause, longer this time. "Mr. Webb, this is an extremely serious matter. If what you're saying is accurate, we're talking about recovered assets worth considerable value. I need to arrange for verification. Can you remain at the property for the next 24 to 48 hours? "Yes," Marcus said, though he had no idea what he'd eat or how he'd keep warm that long. "Good. I'm going to have someone fly to Colorado tomorrow morning. They'll bring law enforcement with them for security purposes and to document everything properly. Do you understand that you'll need to give a full statement?" "I understand." "Mr. Webb, I have to ask, why did you reach out? You could have taken what you found and disappeared. No one knew you were there." Marcus looked at the safe, at the bundles of cash that could have changed his life. "Because it wasn't mine," he said simply. "And because a better man than me died so I could have the chance to do the right thing. I wasn't going to waste that." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Samantha's voice came back, softer now, less professional. "What's your situation, Mr. Webb? Where are you living?" "I'm not. Living anywhere, I mean. I'm homeless, been that way for about 18 months. "And you found $265 million and called to return it?" Marcus closed his eyes. "How did you know the amount?" "The letter of intent is on file with us. A copy at least. Johnny prepared it but never executed it. We thought the money had been moved elsewhere, that he'd changed his mind." "He didn't change his mind," Marcus said. "He just ran out of courage to follow through. It's all here, every dollar, waiting for someone to use it the way he wanted." Another pause. Then, "Mr. Webb, please stay where you are. Someone will be there tomorrow. And Mr. Webb, thank you for doing this, for being who you are." The phone died as soon as he hung up, the screen going black, the battery finally giving out. Marcus set it down and realized his hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear or cold or indecision. From relief. He'd done it. Made the call. Set events in motion he couldn't stop. And instead of feeling like he'd lost something, he felt lighter, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had finally lifted. He spent the rest of the night in the master bedroom, building a fire in the fireplace to stay warm, wrapped in blankets he'd found in a closet. He didn't sleep much, his mind too active, playing out scenarios of what would happen next. But when he did drift off, he didn't have nightmares. For the first time in years, his sleep was peaceful. The next afternoon, Marcus heard vehicles coming up the long driveway. He'd spent the morning cleaning himself up as best he could, using water from the taps that somehow still worked, washing his face and hands, trying to look presentable. He stood on the front steps as 3 black SUVs pulled up, their tires crunching on the snow-packed driveway. Samantha Gray stepped out of the first vehicle, exactly as Marcus had imagined her, 50s, sharp-eyed, dressed in an expensive coat and boots that were too clean for mountain weather. Behind her came 2 other people, a man in his 30s carrying a briefcase and a woman with a camera. From the second SUV emerged 2 police officers, both looking serious and official. The third vehicle held what looked like security personnel, large men in dark clothes who fanned out around the property with the practiced efficiency of people who knew what they were doing. Samantha approached Marcus, her heels somehow managing the icy steps. "Mr. Webb?" Marcus nodded. "Thank you for waiting. This is David Torres, my associate, and Linda Chen, our forensic accountant. The officers are here to document everything and ensure proper chain of custody. Do you mind if we come in?" Marcus stepped aside, letting them enter. He watched as they took in the mansion, the dusty furniture, the covered paintings, the photographs still hanging on the walls. Samantha moved through the space like someone revisiting a memory, touching things gently, her professional mask slipping slightly. "I was here once," she said quietly. 2009. Johnny had just bought the place. He was so excited, so hopeful. He thought he'd found sanctuary. "What happened?" Marcus asked. She smiled sadly. "Life. Fame. The world doesn't let people like Johnny disappear, no matter how hard they try. Eventually, he had to come back, and this place became a reminder of failure instead of hope." Marcus led them upstairs through the hidden passage to the third-floor office. When he opened the door and they saw the safe, saw the money still stacked exactly as he'd found it, Linda gasped. Samantha just nodded slowly. "It's real," she whispered. "It's all real." They spent 4 hours documenting everything. The police photographed every bundle of cash, every document, every page of every journal. Linda counted the money twice, her fingers flying over the bills with practiced speed while David took notes and recorded video. Samantha read the letter of intent 3 times, tears forming in her eyes by the third reading. Finally, when everything had been documented and counted and verified, Samantha turned to Marcus. $264,873,000, she said. 127,000 short of what the letter says, probably from inflation or small withdrawals before he hit it, but essentially intact. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Samantha looked at him for a long moment. "Now we execute Johnny's wishes. The letter of intent is legally binding. We'll have to go through probate to make it official, but the money will be distributed exactly as he specified. To his children, to charities, to veterans organizations, to creating this retreat he envisioned." She paused. "There's also the matter of a finder's fee. You're entitled to compensation for discovering and protecting this asset." Marcus shook his head. "I don't want compensation. I just wanted to do the right thing." "Mr. Webb, the standard finder's fee in a case like this would be 10%. That's over $26 million. Marcus's vision swam. He sat down hard on the desk chair. "I can't accept that. That's too much. That's not why I called." Samantha knelt in front of him, her eyes steady and kind. "I know it's not why you called, but it's what you're entitled to. You found something extraordinary, and instead of stealing it, you protected it. Instead of running, you stayed. You did something most people wouldn't have the courage to do, and that deserves recognition." Marcus thought about it, his mind spinning. $26 million. It was still an impossible number, still more than he could process. but it was less than the full amount, which somehow made it feel different. Earned, maybe, instead of stolen. "I don't need 26 million, he said slowly. "But I could use help. The surgery I need costs about 90,000, and I'd like to get back on my feet, find a place to live, maybe reconnect with my daughter." Samantha nodded. "What if we set up a trust for you? Enough to cover your medical care, housing, living expenses. You'd never have to worry about money again, and the rest could go to a foundation in your name, helping other veterans in similar situations. You could run it if you wanted. Turn this moment into something that helps thousands of people." Marcus looked around the room, at the safe that had held so many secrets, at the journals that told the story of a man running from himself, at the letter that had shown him what real wealth looked like. "A foundation," he repeated. "For veterans." "For veterans," Samantha confirmed. "Helping them get the surgeries they need, the mental health care, the housing assistance, all the things that fall through the cracks. You know what they need because you've lived it. Who better to help them?" Marcus felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked tight for years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping kind he'd felt looking at the money in the safe, but something quieter, steadier, more real. Hope that came from purpose instead of profit. "Okay," he said. "Let's do that." 2 weeks later, Marcus sat in a hospital bed in Denver, recovering from the first of 3 surgeries that would remove the remaining shrapnel from his leg. The doctors said the procedures were going well, that he'd regain most of the function he'd lost, that the pain that had been his constant companion for 7 years would finally, mercifully, end. Through the hospital window, he could see snow falling gently, covering the city in white. His phone, a new one that Samantha had given him, buzzed with a text message. He picked it up and smiled. It was from Emma. "Dad, is it true? Mom showed me the news article. Is that really you?" The article had come out 3 days ago. National news, the story of a homeless veteran who'd found a hidden fortune and given it back. The press had loved it, turning Marcus into an overnight hero, the kind of feel-good story that went viral and made people believe the world wasn't completely broken. Marcus had hated the attention at first, had tried to avoid the cameras and interviews, but Samantha had convinced him it was important. "Your story gives people hope," she'd said. "It reminds them that good people still exist. Don't rob them of that." Marcus typed back slowly, his fingers still clumsy on the new phone. "It's true, sweetheart. All of it. I'd love to tell you about it in person if you're willing to see me." The reply came almost instantly. "Yes. When can I come?" Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. "Anytime. I'm in Denver, room 423. I'll be here for another week recovering from surgery." "I'll be there tomorrow. I've missed you, Dad." "I've missed you too, baby, more than you know." He set the phone down and looked out at the snow, thinking about everything that had happened, everything that had changed. The mansion in the mountains had been secured, the money distributed according to Johnny's wishes. 50 million had gone to his children, held in trust. 50 million to the Motion Picture and Television Fund. 25 million to environmental groups, 25 million to arts education, 25 million split between the Wounded Warrior Project and the VA, and the remaining 90 million, along with the mansion itself, had been used to create exactly what Johnny had envisioned, a retreat for artists and actors who needed sanctuary from the public eye. Samantha had named it the Whitmore Retreat after a character Johnny had played years ago, and it had opened quietly last week. No publicity, no grand announcement, just a phone number that agents and managers could call when their clients needed time away. The first guest had arrived 2 days ago, a young actress Marcus had seen in movies, someone dealing with the pressure of sudden fame. She'd posted a photo from the retreat on her private Instagram, just a view of the mountains with the caption, "Found peace where I didn't expect it." Marcus's trust had been set up with $2 million, more than enough to cover his medical care, housing, and living expenses for the rest of his life. The remaining finder's fee, over $24 million, had been used to establish the Torres Foundation, named after the friend who'd saved Marcus's life and taught him what real courage looked like. The foundation would help homeless veterans get back on their feet, providing medical care, housing assistance, job training, and mental health support. Marcus would run it once he recovered, would pour everything he'd learned from 18 months on the streets into making sure other veterans didn't have to suffer the way he had. But more important than any of it, more than the money or the foundation or even the surgery, was the text from Emma. 3 simple messages that meant his daughter still loved him, still wanted him in her life, still believed he could be someone worth knowing. That was the real treasure. That was what mattered. The next day, Emma walked into his hospital room. She was 16 now, tall and beautiful, with her mother's dark hair and Marcus's blue eyes. She stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain, and Marcus could see her trying to reconcile the father she remembered with the man in the hospital bed, thinner, grayer, marked by years of pain and hardship. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. Marcus felt his throat close up. "Hi, baby. Come here." She crossed the room and hugged him carefully, mindful of the IV lines and monitors, and Marcus held her as tight as he dared, breathing in the smell of her shampoo, feeling the reality of her against him. His daughter, still his, despite everything. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "I read everything. About what you found. About what you did. Dad, why didn't you keep it? You could have had everything." Marcus smiled, wiping tears from his own eyes. "I did keep it. I kept my honor, my self-respect, the ability to look you in the eye without shame. Those things are worth more than any amount of money." Emma sat in the chair beside his bed, still holding his hand. "Mom said you're going to run a foundation for veterans." "I am. It's called the Torres Foundation, after my friend who died in Afghanistan, the one who saved my life." "Tell me about him," Emma said. And Marcus did. He told her about Torres, about Afghanistan, about the choices that had led him from the military to the streets to a frozen mansion in the mountains. He told her about finding the safe, about the letter from Johnny Depp, about the moment he'd almost taken the money and the memory of Torres that had stopped him. He told her everything, holding nothing back, letting her see all of it, the good and the bad, the strength and the weakness, the man he'd been and the man he was trying to become. When he finished, Emma was crying openly. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I know that probably doesn't mean much after everything, but I am. You did something incredible." "It means everything," Marcus said. "You mean everything." They talked for hours, catching up on 3 years of missed time. Emma told him about school, about her friends, about wanting to study social work in college because she wanted to help people the way her father was helping people. Marcus told her about his plans for the foundation, about the retreat in the mountains, about how he wanted to make sure his second chance turned into second chances for others. When visiting hours ended and Emma had to leave, she hugged him again, longer this time. "I'll come back tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you get out of here." "I'd like that," Marcus said. "I'd like that a lot." After she left, Marcus lay in the hospital bed and stared at the ceiling, processing everything that had happened. A month ago, he'd been homeless, injured, invisible, convinced his life was over at 41. Now he had purpose, resources, a relationship with his daughter, and a future that stretched beyond just surviving to the next day. All because he'd stumbled into a frozen mansion during a blizzard. All because he'd found a fortune and chosen to give it back. All because he'd remembered Torres and decided to honor that sacrifice by being the kind of man his friend had believed he could be. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the main hall of the Torres Foundation headquarters, a renovated building in downtown Denver that had once been a veterans' hospital. The space was bright and welcoming, with comfortable furniture, warm colors, and photos on the walls of the men and women the foundation had helped. In the 6 months since opening, they'd assisted over 300 veterans, providing medical care, housing, job placement, and counseling. Some of them were doing well now, back on their feet, rebuilding their lives. Others were still struggling, but no longer struggling alone. Marcus walked with a slight limp now, noticeable but not debilitating. The surgeries had been successful, removing the last of the shrapnel, repairing the damaged nerves and tissue. He'd never run a marathon, but he could walk without constant pain, could stand for hours without his leg giving out, could sleep through the night without waking up in agony. The doctors called it a miracle. Marcus called it a second chance. Emma was with him today, volunteering during her summer break before starting college in the fall. She worked the front desk, greeting veterans who came in, making them feel welcome, reminding them they mattered. Marcus watched her interact with a young former Marine, maybe 25, who'd been living in his car for 6 months. Emma talked to him with kindness and respect, taking down his information, explaining what services the Foundation offered, treating him like a human being instead of a problem to be solved. The Marine's shoulders relaxed as they talked, his defensive posture softening. By the time Emma finished, he was smiling. "Your daughter's good at this," a voice said behind Marcus. He turned to find Samantha Gray standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. She'd become a friend over the months, checking in regularly, helping navigate the legal and financial complexities of running a foundation. "She gets it from her mother," Marcus said, accepting the coffee. "Kelly always knew how to make people feel valued." "And from her father," Samantha added, "the man who gave up a fortune because it was the right thing to do." Marcus shook his head. "I've never understood why people think that was such a big deal. The money wasn't mine. Returning it wasn't heroic. It was just basic decency." "That's exactly why it matters," Samantha said. "Because you don't think it was special. Because you did it without expecting recognition or reward. Because for you, it was just the obvious choice." She paused. "Most people aren't like you, Marcus. Most people would have taken the money and justified it 6 different ways. What you did was extraordinary, even if you can't see it." Later that evening, after the foundation had closed and Emma had gone home, Marcus drove to the cemetery where Torres was buried. He made this drive once a month, a quiet ritual, a way of keeping his promise. The headstone was simple. Sergeant David Torres, U.S. Army, 1983 to 2017. Beloved son, father, friend, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Marcus knelt in the grass, his new leg allowing him to do so without pain for the first time in years. "Hey, brother," he said softly. "Wanted to give you an update. The foundation hit 300 veterans help this month. 300, man. People who were where I was, scared and alone and convinced nobody cared. We're giving them hope, giving them a shot at rebuilding. I think you'd be proud." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "Emma's doing great. She's going to college in the fall, studying social work. Says she wants to help people like her old man. I keep telling her she should do something with her life that pays better, but she's stubborn. Wonder where she gets that from." Marcus smiled, wiping at his eyes. "I think about you every day, about what you did for me, about what you taught me. That moment in the mansion, when I was standing there with all that money, it was your voice I heard, your words about character being what you do when nobody's watching. You saved my life twice, Torres. Once in Afghanistan and once in the mountains. I'm trying to make both of those saves count for something. I'm trying to be the man you believed I could be." He stood slowly, his hand resting on the headstone for a moment. "Miss you, brother. Always will. But I'm okay now. Better than okay. I'm alive. Really alive. And I'm using every day you gave me to help others. That's the promise. That's the mission. And I'm not stopping until they put me in the ground next to you." Marcus drove home to his small apartment. Nothing fancy but clean and warm and his. He made dinner, called Emma to say goodnight, and sat by the window watching the city lights. Tomorrow he'd go back to the foundation, help more veterans, continue building something that mattered. But tonight he let himself rest. Let himself feel the peace that came from knowing he'd made the right choice, even when it had cost him everything, even when it would have been easier to take the money and run. Because Marcus Webb had learned something in that frozen mansion, something that had changed him at a fundamental level. Real wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in who you became when you were tested, in the choices you made when no one would ever know, in the legacy you left behind when you were gone. Johnny Depp had tried to buy freedom and found it couldn't be purchased, but Marcus, a homeless veteran with nothing to lose, had found freedom in letting go, in choosing honor over comfort, in remembering that some things, dignity, integrity, self-respect, couldn't be bought or sold or stolen. They could only be earned, and once earned, they were worth more than all the money in all the safes in all the mansions in the world. Because they were the only things you could take with you when everything else was gone. The only things that truly belonged to you. The only things that mattered when you looked at yourself in the mirror and asked if you were someone worth being. And for Marcus Webb, the answer was finally, gratefully, yes. Anyone can find fortune, but it takes a hero to walk away from it. And sometimes the greatest treasures aren't found in vaults, but in the courage to do what's right when everything inside you screams to do what's easy. As Marcus drifted off to sleep that night, warm and safe and whole for the first time in years, he understood that he hadn't lost anything in that frozen mansion. He'd found himself. And that discovery, that moment of choosing character over comfort, had transformed not just his life, but the lives of hundreds of others who would never even know his name. The homeless veteran who found $265 million and gave it back hadn't just saved a fortune, he'd saved himself. And in doing so, he'd proven that sometimes the coldest nights lead to the warmest dawns, and the hardest choices lead to the most meaningful lives. Because for Marcus Webb and everyone his foundation would help, redemption wasn't something you bought. It was something you earned, one right choice at a time, even when those choices cost you everything. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible true stories are waiting for you. Click to keep the journey going. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe heroes are made in the choices we make when everything is on the line.